Welcome again to this class in our Lenten series. I hope you know that Dan Wessner and Peter Hulak are delighted to be among you, so thank you for participating again. We're enjoying this time reading this profound book together, this book by Dr. Walter Brueggemann, written just as the pandemic was beginning. This pandemic that he urges us to view as a summons. In our time together, we have considered these questions. As we turn to God in crisis, how may we restore, reinvigorate, and transform our faith in our relations? And we'll dig in a little deeper today with the question about relationships. Here's an answer so far, let's call it a working answer. Embracing this crisis, yet acknowledging God as the subject of all life, and of the cosmos, we may prepare for chesed, change in all relations. Together we have considered these crises, these questions. Vaccines, cases, deaths, surges, fissures, racism, war, climate crises, narcissism, poverty, and pain. They're still there, aren't they? At the same time as we acknowledge those, we ask, where are grace and mercy in all of this tumult? And how and with whom should we move toward a new creation? Dr. Brueggemann invites us to view Psalm 77 as an invitation, a summons, if you will, to think more deeply about who we are. What do we know about crises? Dan and I will read these first 6 verses of Psalm 77 twice. And we urge you, as you listen, perhaps read on your own as we read. Consider these Psalms in 2 contexts. Consider these words that way. If you would, listen with your global ears on, thinking about war over there, poverty here, all those crises that we've talked about so often. Here's that first reading then. I cry aloud to God, that he may hear me. In the day of my trouble, I seek the Lord. In the night, my hand is stretched out without wearying. My soul refuses to be comforted. I think of God and I moan. I meditate and my spirit faints. Thou dost hold my eyelids from closing. I am so troubled that I cannot speak. I consider the days of old. I remember the years long ago. I commune with my heart in the night. I meditate and search my spirit.
So listen to this first part of Psalm 77 a second time from a personal perspective. I cry aloud to God, that he may hear me. In the day of my trouble, I seek the Lord. In the night, my hand is stretched out without wearying. My soul refuses to be comforted. I think of God and I moan. I meditate and my spirit faints. Thou dost not hold my eyelids from closing. I am so troubled that I cannot speak. I consider the days of old. I remember the days, the years long ago. I commune with my heart in the night. I meditate and search my spirit. And now a second movement of this psalm is actually a quote. Will the Lord spurn forever and never again be favorable? Has his steadfast love forever ceased? Are his promises at an end for all time? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger shut up his compassion?
The fascinating thing about this psalm, at least one of the fascinating things, is here it is at about the center of the book of Psalms. And at the center of this central psalm is a central verse that marks a move, that marks a movement having stated, the psalmist having stated those verses at the beginning, and now saying this. It's as if the psalmist says, aha, here are the words. And I say, it is my grief that the right hand of the Most High has changed.
So the next movement, Pete and I will again read it twice. And the question is, what change? In what direction? And whose change? So first, Pete will read it, and we ask that you think of it in global terms. I'll read it a second time, and we'll ask that you think of it in personal terms.
I will call to mind the deeds of the Lord. Yea, I will remember the wonders of old. I will meditate on all thy work and muse on thy mighty deeds. Thy way, O God, is holy. What God is great like our God? Thou art the God who workest wonders, who hast manifested thy might among the peoples. Thou dost with thine arm redeem thy people, the sons of Jacob and Joseph.
I will call to mind the deeds of the Lord. Yea, I will remember thy wonders of old. I will meditate on all thy work and muse on thy mighty deeds. Thy way, O God, is holy. What God is great like our God? Thou art the God who workest wonders, who hast manifested thy might among the peoples. Thou didst with thy arm redeem thy people, the sons of Jacob and Joseph.
The psalmist continues now in yet a new vein. When the waters saw thee, O God, when the waters saw thee, they were afraid. Yea, the deep trembled. The clouds poured out water. The skies gave forth thunder. Thy arrows flashed on every side. The crash of thy thunder was in the whirlwind. Thy lightnings lighted up the world. The earth trembled and shook. Thy way was through the sea, thy path through the great waters, yet thy footprints were unseen. Thou didst lead thy people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. We love to reflect when we're together on Wednesday evening about the evolution of thought that happens just in these verses, these wonderful 20 verses, about how the psalmist in praying, in lamenting, in moaning, goes through a spiritual change and invites us into that change too. Changes from a point, could we even perhaps call it narcissism, Now, you don't have to have a serious personality disorder without it. Even without that, many of us still have these narcissistic elements in our soul. The psalmist invites us, we think, to say, let's identify that. I thought it was about myself. Now it has changed. Now it has changed.
So that's one shift.
Yes.
That occurs in the 20 verses. Another shift is relational. And chapter 5 is about relationships. Psalm 77 is about relationships. From my I at the beginning to that crucible verse in the middle to thy, thou at the end. And Brueggemann is saying there is in our focus through prayer, in the course of a virus, a need to shift from I to thou, from my to thy. And this is the prism, and through that prism we see three trajectories, one covenantal, one the purposeful intent of God, and the third is that inscrutable, raw, holy power of God. Those three trajectories are all with God as the subject, not I, not my. So Brueggemann is making the point to shift from I to thou. And that brings to mind a very important moral philosopher from the 20th century, Martin Buber, who wrote one of the more seminal philosophy books of the last century. And he wrote it in 1923, right after World War I. And Buber's book, I and Thou, presents two distinct ways in which we might engage others. The first, I, it. The subject is I, and all else is it. I objectify and I dehumanize others, and I denude the world in my consumption and my domination of resources. T.S. Eliot calls that denuded, dehumanized, objectified world the wasteland. And in that wasteland, Martin Buber says, we find no purpose in life. By contrast, the other very distinct way to engage life and to engage others and spiritually to engage God is I-thou. And in that relationship, it's all about regard and reciprocity and responsibility and relationship with the other and with God. Buber says it is in relationships that we come to value all that really is. Another important person here for us to consider, another philosopher, is Aristotle. So now dropping back to 300 BCE, closer to the time of the Old Testament prophets that Brueggemann is bringing to us, Aristotle writes about rhetoric, which I would argue is a term sorely misunderstood in society. And it's too bad, because rhetoric can be good. Rhetoric can even be loving. Aristotle writes that we must listen to and observe, first and foremost, the other. Not begin with our thoughts, not begin with our speech, not begin with our performative prayers and our teaching and our actions, but first and foremost, listen, observe the other. And do it in three ways. Listen and observe how another person thinks. What is their thought process? What's their logic? What facts are they relying on? And in Greek, that is logos. Second, consider how another person feels, how they emote. What are their stories? What's their life narrative? and in Greek, that is pathos. And third, listen hard and discern what is the authority that another person is resting upon. What is their grounded authority? Their mores, their principles, their value system. And that is ethos. So if first and foremost, I am observing and listening to the other, be that a person, be that a family member, be that my partner in life, be that God, think of the logos, the pathos, the ethos of the other first and foremost. Process that. And only then share your speech. In this case, mine. My logos, pathos, ethos. They come second. So we've seen this theme throughout the book, where we go from penultimate to ultimate. Pick up on that, Pete, as we review what we've learned so far with Walter Brueggemann.
And what we've learned with being with all of you. Thanks, Dan. In the context of calamity, whether it's today's or ancient ones, whether they're global or personal, here's what we've learned. Lean into crisis. Don't ignore the potential of what this calamity can lead us to understand. Listen for logos, pathos, ethos. We've learned to focus our attention on God's covenant, God's purposeful intent, and God's holy power. We've begun to learn to discern mercy in pestilence. We've begun to anticipate, to look for chesed, hope, and for tenacious solidarity. We've learned to pray to God. That's the ultimate beyond the penultimate. Shifting from it's all about me to I, thou regard, reciprocity, relations with one's neighbor, with nature, and with God. So we're refining our questions a little bit. Where is God in all of this? We've talked about, the why God questions, and we're looking at it a bit differently now. And then this question of who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor in this pandemic? And one in our class community here last week asked a wonderful question that we all ask. Why is it that all this work we put into this through history hasn't eliminated pestilence and sword and famine? Why? Why is it? Why are we still stuck in the old ways? So that question is still on the table, and we will attend to it.
So as we look ahead to Wednesday and our next session, we've got a really special treat, and that is this. We're going to offer our questions, our concerns, our collective prayer to Walter Brueggemann, and Clover and Tim will be spending 3 days with him at the end of March and beginning of April, and we'll convey what we've learned and what we're asking and what we're praying to Dr. Brueggemann. And then they will record with their iPhone his response to us, which I think is really pretty neat.
And and we are narcissistic enough to think that Dr. Brueggemann might actually want to hear our questions. So do it.
Yes, please.
Get your questions together.
Please do. And I'm the scribe for the course, so whatever you bring, I'm taking very careful notes, and we will incorporate it all in what we share with Dr. Brueggemann. But in summation, ask yourself and be thinking and praying about what might our collective prayer, relations, and response be in the course of the pandemic. And we look forward to seeing you Wednesday night.
We do.